Hello and welcome to this video trailer of Reinventing Yourself. And I want to just say, as we go through this, please feel free to stop the video, have a notebook or some means of taking notes, digital or manual. I don't mind which, it's up to you. But you may want to stop and take notes as we go. So, I'm taking it that most of you who are watching this, reinventing yourself and thinking of reinventing yourself, we all have transitions in our lives. And you've already been through more transitions than you realize, because right from we're very little, whether we go to a nursery group or kindergarten, before starting school, we're there, and we the time comes when we have to start primary school. That's what we call it in the UK, our first proper school, primary school, usually around the age of 4 or 5. And we've got some friends who have already started, and we're very excited and we're looking forward, because that's what the big girls and the big boys do. They go to school, and so that is a big transition, you know. And then when we leave primary school and we move on to secondary school, that's another big transition when we're 11, and we're really looking forward to it, but we're nervous and anxious as well, perhaps. So these transitions usually are a mixture of excitement and anxiety. And what I want to tell you, this is just something that's useful for you to know, that excitement and anxiety are very similar feelings. They feel very similar, but one's not very good and the other is good. Excitement feels good and anxiety feels not good. And anxiety actually is often when we keep the lid on something we feel excited about, because we're told don't get too excited, because you'll make yourself sick or whatever. Adults seem to not want children to be excited, but actually it's good to be excited. And when we allow ourselves to be excited, there's less chance of us being anxious. So anyway, after school, we go to college or maybe university, or we go and start a career. And all of that has that mixture of excitement and anxiety. But those transitions in childhood and early adulthood are mostly something that we look forward to and that we can feel excited about. Moving on into life, there's maybe getting married, and then maybe becoming a parent, and there's still things to feel excited about, but it may be a lot depends on your circumstances then. And the earlier transitions, usually we had a parent or a caregiver in the background who had some responsibility for us, and they would make sure that we had all the things that we needed, like a school uniform and bus fare and, packed lunches, and see that we were resourced. As we move on through life and as we get older, we don't have somebody else standing in the background making sure that we've got everything that we need. We are that person who has to take care of ourselves. And so a lot of you watching this may be watching it because maybe you've gone through a relationship breakdown or a marriage or a redundancy or some other life-changing event, like, maybe you've had a serious health challenge, maybe a life-threatening challenge, and maybe, an injury or an accident or something that has changed your life in some significant way. And so there's nobody else to take you through except you. And it feels, quite challenging, and it feels lonely as well, and scary and frightening. And there's a lot of uncertainty around. And so these kind of later life transitions, maybe your partner has died, maybe there is a divorce looming in the future. That can all be very frightening, and it doesn't have the same degree of excitement with it. It can do if you allow yourself to get past the fear to what might lie on the other side of the challenge of it. So just to give you a blueprint here, that there are 5 stages of reinventing yourself. And so we're going to break this down into 5 stages. And so you'll know as you go through this process of moving through some life challenging event, that there's 5 stages that you'll go through. And look, people try to skip these stages, or they don't see that it's necessary. Well, all I would say to you is you don't know what you don't know. And it's far better to take this step by step, and then you'll get through it quicker. If you jump any one of them, you'll have to come back again and fill in the gap. So the first stage is heal your history. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to move on into the future. And your history, where you've been wounded, is always there, like a window running in the background. No matter how much you've managed to block it out, it's still there. And it's far better now, before you start reinventing yourself, because it will get in the way of you reinventing yourself if you don't stop and take time to heal your history. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, what do you mean heal my history? There's nothing wrong with my history. My history was fine. I had a very happy childhood. And, the happy childhoods are actually as rare as hen's teeth. But that's the story. So the second part is tell your story. That's the story people told themselves to survive. My parents were wonderful, and all good things happened to me, and I had a lot of happy times, and da da da. But we'll look at that more as we go on. But there is a story to tell. The third stage is to grieve your losses. And by the time you get to this, you will discover that there were losses in your childhood. There were things that were missing. And it's not about blaming your parents either. So people get defensive and they think that this is an attack on their parents, and they get very defensive and just won't see it. But there are losses, which I will talk about later, that need to be grieved, because grief, it just sits there. And if in the UK culture, it's very much about stiff upper lip and put it behind you and don't look at it and move on. But it doesn't go away. Grief does not go away until you mourn and grieve, and then you can let go and move on. But if you don't grieve your losses, they are still there underneath, colouring and feeding into your future as you move into it. So it really, really does make a difference if you make a good, clean job of it. So the fourth stage is to identify your patterns. Without realizing it or necessarily being conscious of it, you will have got and developed patterns of how you operate, and you won't necessarily be aware of that. So that's why you need to identify the patterns, because all the patterns that actually got you to where you are now are still there, and the chances are, if you don't identify them, you're doomed to repeat history and do the same thing over again. And when you've done those 4 stages, then it's a case of move on and be the change you want to see in the world. So by that time, you are being your authentic self, the you were always meant to be, without layers, occluding the essence of you. So I'm just going to say more about each one of those stages now. So heal your history. What do I mean by that? Well, we're born whole. We come into the world like this newborn baby. I mean, who has ever seen a newborn baby that didn't think, oh, and all your instincts when you see a newborn baby like this, all your instincts are to just love them and hold them and protect them. And they're so vulnerable. But are we born whole? Yes and no. Not every baby comes into the world as a wanted baby. They're not all welcome. Some were accidents, some were not planned, and some weren't planned, but then they were made welcome. But the point is, whatever emotions our mothers are feeling gets transferred to the baby in the womb. And so one of the first things that you want to look at is, and it's best to just look at this as a matter of fact and make notes as we go. Were you wanted? Were you welcome? What were the circumstances of your conception? What were the circumstances of your birth? For example, I definitely was not a wanted child. I was illegitimate during, the post-war period. So everybody was just recovering from the war here in the UK, and I was in Ireland. Well, my mother was in Ireland, and she found herself pregnant with me post-war 1940s. Not a good time in Ireland to be having an illegitimate child. No provision for that. And so she concealed the pregnancy right up until the last few weeks. So physically, mentally, emotionally, every which way, energetically, the baby that I was, even before birth, was constricted and constrained, and my mother was very fearful and frightened, and there were fears she had about somebody noticing that she was pregnant. So, like, the injunction for the baby that I was in the womb was, you must not be seen. And so I came into the world with those injunctions. So many children are born with prenatal messages that it's dangerous, or that they're not wanted, or they're not welcome, or they've picked up a lot of fear and anxiety from their mother. I did study prenatal and perinatal psychology. I was very fortunate to do that in the west of Ireland, and it was quite interesting because I subsequently was adopted, and so doing that study was actually quite therapeutic for me, as well as professionally very interesting. So yes, we are born whole, but many of us come in with baggage that we've already picked up along the way. So it is useful to, if you have a relationship with your mother, your parents, if you are able to discuss that with them and talk to them about the prenatal. I mean, they're not always honest. They tell you what they think you want to hear. But actually, look, this is not about blaming anybody. It's just getting the facts. That's all. So after we're born, we are all hardwired with the events that go on around us. So you can see this is our infant self here in the middle, bewildered by what's coming up. So we start off there, the newborn, with whatever we brought in. But hopefully, I think most mums don't actually have very contented pregnancies. Some do, and the world is becoming more enlightened now about the importance of mothers and mums to be being calm and relaxed, and that if you have a calm, relaxed pregnancy, you'll have a calm, relaxed baby. So for some people, they have an anxious mother. Some people have parents who have difficult relationships, or maybe domestic abuse, which is leaves for a very scared and frightened mother. That's not really good for a child. Some, when you're little, certainly when I was growing up, if children were perceived as being naughty, like, really, what is naughty? Children are just full of curiosity, discovering and wanting to explore things, and some adult decides they're being naughty because they touched or something that was deemed that they shouldn't, and they should have just known that. And the way of training them was to smack them or shout at them and tell them, here we have a very strict mum telling her child, you must not do that. Now, sometimes if it's life-threatening and dangerous, then maybe there is a need to have a stern tone, but there needs to be kindness. There needs to be taking into account the cognitive development of the child that you were. So I want you to reflect on, how was it for you when you were going through these stages as an infant, and maybe early days at school, and what was going on with your parents? How were they? Because, and like I say, this is not about blaming your parents, because often they are simply, they're young themselves, relatively speaking, and being a parent and knowing what to do doesn't come uh, easily. There's not a handbook that comes with it. And their parenting will have been influenced by the parenting that they had from their parents. And so there's always a time lag in how we are parented. So looking over here, you may have been ill as a child, or you may have been hospitalized. Anything that creates a separation of you with your parent can leave you with a fear of abandonment. And that goes quite deep, particularly if just postnatal, if you had to go into an incubator and be separated from your mother. Remember, a newborn baby has no idea of time. Time is a social construction. That baby just knows that its whole world has disappeared, and it does not know, oh, well, they're going to take me back in a couple of hours. The baby just knows and experiences it as, I've been abandoned. And young children, if they're in hospital and they're surrounded by strangers, nurses and doctors are strangers to them, they don't know that these people who are using all kinds of instruments and implements on them that are uncomfortable and cold, they don't know what that's all about. They don't understand it. And not all doctors and nurses have good bedside manners. So if any of that happened to you, it leaves, it has a wiring effect, and it leaves you with some anxieties and fears. And it may be that if you have a sibling who was ill or needed routine hospital attention or health care, that you might feel that you were second best, that their needs were always better more than yours, and your little mind would have construed that as, well, that my parents love them more than they love me. And so just make notes of any of these things. We may have been bullied in school, as we can see here. Many people are bullied by older children, and that can be very scary and leaves an imprint, and it can leave you feeling quite anxious. Now, the point is, you can say, oh, well, that was all a long time ago. The trouble is, when you go into a transition, all of these things, all of these things get triggered. You may have been a child who was sent off to boarding school. And although your parents were saying to you, well, we've really sacrificed so that you can have this, and it's costing us a lot of money, and you're supposed to be grateful, all the child knows is that you're sending them somewhere far away, and they're surrounded by people that they don't know, and they're frightened, and they feel that that you don't want them, and you've rejected them, and that maybe they're not lovable, and they're flawed in some way. And if only they were different, then you wouldn't send them away and you'd keep them at home. In spite of all the things you say, that's mental. Well, we really care about you and your education, so we're sending you away. Here in the UK, it was the done thing, and it was supposed to be, considered a good thing to send your children off for an education. But it has um, a damaging effect on children to send them away. So the needs of a child, so just touching on the needs of a child, we have a need to be touched. So make notes of what you remember in your childhood of these needs and where they met for you consistently, not just once in a blue moon, but consistently. Were you routinely touched appropriately in a loving and kind and nurturing and holding way? Were you taken in somebody's arms and hugged and held and touched and looked at? Were you given attention and guidance, not discipline, but guidance? And did you have freedom to explore with guidance? Were there appropriate boundaries? Or, where I used to be able to go out to play in the street and I could have wandered off anywhere and nobody ever knew where I was. And that wasn't anybody being unkind, uncaring, or otherwise. They were busy. And that was in the days when there wasn't too much traffic about and children were allowed to go outside to play. But it was dangerous because there were no boundaries in place. And it was beyond my cognitive understanding to don't go far. People would say, don't go too far. Well, what's that to a child? What's that to a 4-year-old? Don't go too far. Children don't know what's too far. Mirroring. When you're sad, the adults around you can look at you and oh, you seem sad, and they mirror how you look. Or oh, you seem glad. Oh, what's going on for you? Often the adults around us didn't necessarily tune into us to mirror back to us, and so we don't have a sense of ourselves. And unconditional love, many of us growing up had a sense of just being loved conditionally. We were loved as long as we were good, as long as we behaved, as long as we were well mannered. But if we were bold girls or bad girls or boys, or we didn't behave, it was a lot of disapproval and a sense that you could lose love very easily. It wasn't a case of feeling loved because essentially you were lovable. And that feeds into acceptance. There's a need for fun and play. If you grow up in a family where they're busy a lot, both parents are working, well, often there's not a whole lot of opportunity for fun and play. And often you get a lonely mother who's taking her children to the park and she's feeling lonely and depressed herself, but she's wanting to give something to her children. But it's difficult to have fun when you don't feel very happy yourself. So all of those things constitute nurture and love, and sexuality is about being accepted sexually for what you are. Not when I grew up, sexuality was not discussed, talked about. It was a cloak and dagger thing, and it was something to be ashamed of. And certainly, if you were found as a young child touching your genital area, you would get a slap. Just to let you know, that's not acceptable. So, you had negative connotations about your body. We all need opportunities to grieve. When, children, when families move house, they've lost their friends, they've perhaps a much loved pet has died. Changes, things and people, places, and things that go out of a child's life, the child misses them. And adults are so taken up with the business of taking care of it all, they often forget. Or, they'll say to a child if their doll's lost or broken, "Oh, don't worry, we'll get you another one. Don't cry. Stop crying. We'll get you another one." And the child doesn't love another one. The child loved that one, and they need an opportunity to grieve. And if they didn't have opportunities to grieve over moving and losing friends or changing schools and missing the friends that they had, the pets, the toys, those ungrieved griefs and losses are still there, and they are cumulative. So wherever you are in your life now, chances are there are a number of grieved losses, and it's worth stopping the video and make a list of all of those, because it's important that you give the child that you were, who didn't have a chance to speak and actually didn't have the vocabulary to put it into words or even understand what was troubling them or bothering them, but to now give yourself a voice, even if it's just in your journal. And if you're part of a group, that you can just express as opposed to suppress that sadness and sorrow and grief. And it gets it out of your system. It's really important. So children also need opportunities for accomplishment. So either to swim or ride a bike or do sports or climb a hill, or to get good at something, because it helps them to be resilient and it helps with their self-esteem. And if you were a child whose parents were always too busy to help you to get engaged in those things or to organize it for you, then it may be that you don't feel very confident and your self-worth and self-esteem might be low. Children and adolescents, teenagers also have a need for safeguarding, for a parent to be around and not take their eye off the ball, to make sure you're safeguarded. Children, when they get to young adults, adolescents, that's the age and stage, and usually where there's, particularly for girls, but also for boys, where predatory adults will target them, and they get into situations that are far beyond their emotional development to deal with, and they are prone to being abused. So there is a need for being safeguarded. So there are other things, but that is kind of it for now. So do stop the video and make some notes on that. So the next step in reinventing yourself, once you've gone over your history and you've identified all those ways that you've been wounded or hurt or affected, or, tell your story. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going around blabbing or complaining or whatever. It's just know what your story is, that and the things that you didn't really have an opportunity to uh, vocalize or express, rather than it go unheard. Find a tribe that you can speak it out, or a therapist, speak it out and just tell it. It's not so much that somebody else needs to know it, as you need to hear your own story. Now, the thing is, in the telling of your story, it's looking at what happened. So, what you need to do here is to pause the video and make a note of, well, what happened? What were the events in your history that happened? Like for me, I just told you right from the word go. Um, I was hidden and not wanted. And then I was adopted, but it was before the days of adoption, legal adoption. So it was all very informal. And I was just left with the family. It was meant to be just a temporary arrangement, and my mother would come back for me, and she never did. And that happened. So they were significant events. I subsequently, you know, grew up, I married, and then that marriage just didn't work out. It was a bit of a nightmare, really, and it took a long time to get out of it. And I got divorced. So that's part of my story. Now, the thing is, what happened feeds into we have an interpretation, and our interpretation of what happened feeds into the story of what happened, and it's a bit recursive. For example, my interpretation of what happened was, well, if your own mother doesn't want to keep you and gives you away to somebody else, then must be something seriously not okay with you, you know, that you're so unlovable and not wanted. Of course, as time goes on, you come to see that differently. That, you know, with cognitive development and a bit of maturity, understand that it's not so simple as that. So the truth is, it's not what happens to us that harms us. It's the interpretation we make and the meaning we give to it and the beliefs we form about ourselves and others and the world. So the beliefs that we form about ourselves, um, mostly they're not great beliefs. Mostly they're along the lines of, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not okay. You know, there's something a bit flawed with me, shame. So all of those things, and some of you, as you listen to me saying that, will identify with it. But mostly, we're making those interpretations from the point of view of a very young child without the cognitive development to know all the facts and the details that my mother and many other mothers of illegitimate children don't necessarily want to give them up. They actually want to keep them, but they just don't have the personal resources or material resources to be able to do that. And what's love got to do with it? So you kind of have to rejig that as you know, and reinvent your story and change it. So, look, this is just a trailer for a much longer webinar. And if you want to see more, go down to the description down below and you'll see a link that will take you to the webinar where you can click on that and hear the rest. And I look forward to seeing you. And for those of you who have watched so far, please do leave your comments below and click subscribe and like and give me some feedback. And I hope, even if you don't watch the rest, I hope you find that what you did here just now, I hope you find it helpful and useful, and that you'll watch the other trailers of the other videos that are coming up. So bye for now. Bye.